Today, we are going to explore a topic that feels, deceptively simple. It's something most of us probably associate with a routine checkup, maybe like a little bit of fatigue, or that iodized salt shaker sitting on the kitchen table.
It's definitely one of those things that kind of hides in plain sight. You see it every day, but you rarely think about the biological machinery behind it.
Exactly. We were talking about the thyroid gland, and I had this very surface level view.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of the thyroid as just a biological battery. It gives you energy, or if it's low, you get tired. But looking at the research, that is a massive understatement.
It is. It really is. If you want to be technically accurate, you shouldn't think of it as a battery. You should think of it as the master commander of the entire fleet.
That is the vibe I got.
Yeah.
We're talking about a tiny organ, what, maybe 15 to 20 grams?
Roughly, yes. About the weight of a compact car key, something like that.
So it's this tiny butterfly-shaped thing sitting right below your voice box, kind of hugging the trachea. But despite being so small, the data shows that without it, your body's metabolic rate just drops
Oh, it plummets.
by 40 to 50%. You basically operate at half capacity.
Correct. Without thyroid hormone, you are essentially a frozen engine. Your cells are technically alive, but they are idling so low that biological processes they crawl.
And on the flip side, if this little gland goes rogue and produces way too much,
Then your metabolism can spike by 60, even up to 100% above normal.
which to the uninitiated might sound like a great way to lose weight quickly, but as we're going to see, it's actually a catastrophic state for the body.
Absolutely.
It's like running a car in first gear on the highway. Eventually, the engine just explodes.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. The thyroid isn't just providing energy, it dictates the speed of life. It controls how fast your chemical reactions occur, how fast your cells repair themselves, how fast your heart beats.
Even how fast your brain processes information.
Exactly. Everything.
So our mission today is to go deep. We aren't just going to list symptoms. We are going to go microscopic. We're going to look at the iodine pumps, the genetic transcription happening inside the nucleus of your cells, and the specific diseases that happen when this delicate balance breaks.
We're going to uncover the why and the how.
Okay, so let's start where the action happens, the factory floor, the physiologic anatomy. You mentioned it's butterfly-shaped, but if we zoomed in with a high-powered microscope, what are we actually looking at? Because it's not just a slab of meat.
No, not at all. It's much more elegant than that. If you look at a cross-section, it actually looks more like a honeycomb.
A honeycomb.
Yeah. It's composed of thousands of these tiny closed circles called follicles. You can think of them as microscopic spheres, roughly 100 to 300 micrometers wide.
So it's basically a collection of bubbles.
Exactly. And these bubbles are lined with cuboidal epithelial cells. Those cells are the workers. They form the walls of the factory. But the really interesting part is what is inside the bubble.
The colloid.
The colloid. It's this secretory substance that fills the center of the follicle. It's essentially a very specialized protein soup.
And the main ingredient of that soup is?
A massive glycoprotein molecule called thyroglobulin.
I want to stick on this for a second because it feels really unique. Usually an endocrine gland makes a hormone and then just dumps it straight into the blood.
Right.
But the thyroid seems to be manufacturing this giant protein and then storing it in these internal pools.
That is a crucial distinction. The thyroid hormones, we're talking about T3 and T4, are actually formed within that giant thyroglobulin molecule. They are chemically part of it. The thyroid is the only endocrine gland that stores its hormone in such massive quantities outside the cells in this sort of extracellular lake.
Okay, before we get into how it makes this stuff, we have to talk about the supply lines. I was reading the stats on blood flow, and it blew my mind. The source notes say the blood flow to the thyroid is 5 times the weight of the gland per minute.
It is incredibly vascular. Pound for pound, it has one of the highest blood supply rates in the entire body. It's rivaled only by the adrenal cortex.
So for every minute that passes, 5 times the gland's own weight in blood just rushes through it. That sounds like a jet engine intake. Why does it need that much flow?
Because it is a scavenger. It has to pull very specific raw materials out of the blood to do its job. It's constantly hunting for iodine.
Right, iodine. This is the star of the show, really. The text says that to form normal quantities of thyroxine, a human needs to ingest about 50 milligrams of iodine per year.
Which, when you do the math, is a laughably small amount. It works out to about 1 milligram a week.
That's like a grain of sand.
Barely. And yet, for most of human history, and even in parts of the world today, the lack of that single milligram per week has caused, the rise and fall of population.
Wow.
It causes goiters, mental retardation, developmental failure. It's actually terrifying how dependent we are on this one trace element.
It really puts into context why we iodize table salt. It's a public health miracle in a shaker. The source mentions the ratio is usually something like 1 part sodium iodide to every 100,000 parts sodium chloride.
It's probably the cheapest, most effective preventative medicine intervention in history. You sprinkle it on your fries, and you save your thyroid.
So we eat the salt, it goes into the gut, gets absorbed into the blood just like chloride does, but then the thyroid has to catch it, and this is where that high blood flow comes in, right? It's filtering the blood.
Precisely. The kidneys are actively trying to pee the iodine out because, to them, it just looks like waste. But the thyroid cells are uniquely designed to snatch that iodine out of the passing bloodstream before the kidneys can get rid of it.
And how much does it grab?
The thyroid selectively removes about 1/5 of all the iodine from the circulating blood.
It's grabbing every 5th molecule that swims by. That is incredibly efficient.
It's remarkably efficient, and it brings us to the assembly line. This is where the biochemistry gets really fascinating. So step 1 is just getting that iodine from the blood into the cell.
The iodide pump.
The technical name is the sodium iodide symporter, or NIS for short. This is a protein sitting on the basal membrane of the thyroid cell, that's the side facing the blood. And this isn't a passive open door, this is a high-security airlock that requires energy to operate.
Because the concentration of iodine inside the cell is already way, way higher than in the blood, right? So it's pushing against the crowd.
Exactly. You're pumping uphill against a really steep concentration gradient. In a normal gland, the iodine inside is maybe 30 times more concentrated than outside. In a maximally stimulated gland, it can be 250 times more concentrated.
So how does it generate the force to shove more iodine into an already packed room?
It uses a partner, sodium. The pump co-transports 1 iodide ion along with 2 sodium ions. It basically piggybacks on the energy created by the sodium-potassium ATPase pump,
Okay.
which is constantly burning ATP to pump sodium out of the cell.
Okay, I love this mechanism. So the cell spends energy to kick sodium out, which creates this sort of vacuum or deficit. Sodium desperately wants to get back in to equalize the pressure.
Right, it's a powerful gradient.
And the NIS pump says, okay, sodium, you can come back in, but you have to drag this iodine molecule with you.
That is exactly how it works. It utilizes that sodium gradient as its power source. And we call this process iodide trapping.
So now we have iodine trapped inside the cell.
Yeah.
But as we established, the factory floor, the colloid inside the follicle, is on the other side. The iodine has to cross the cell.
Right. It travels across the cell to the apical membrane, that's the side facing the colloid. There, it exits through a different transporter, a chloride-iodide countertransporter called pendrin.
And what does that do?
It basically swaps a chloride ion to push the iodide out into the soup.
Okay, so the iodine is now in the soup. Now we need the other half of the equation, the protein backbone.
While the pump is working, the thyroid cells are simultaneously synthesizing that massive thyroglobulin molecule we talked about earlier. They build it in the endoplasmic reticulum, package it in the Golgi apparatus, and then they dump it into the colloid.
The source mentions that each thyroglobulin molecule contains about 70 tyrosine amino acids. And these are the parking spots where the iodine is going to land.
Yes. Tyrosine is the anchor point. That is where all the chemistry happens. But there is a catch. The iodide we just pumped in is chemically stable. It's an ion. It's happy. It doesn't want to bind to anything.
It's inert.
Right. To make it react, you have to oxidize it. You have to strip electrons off it to make it volatile and, well, sticky. And that is step 4 in our outline. Oxidation.
And this requires a very specific enzyme, doesn't it?
It does. It requires peroxidase, along with its partner, hydrogen peroxide. This enzyme sits right at the apical membrane, right where the thyroglobulin is coming out. It's like a welder at the end of the assembly line.
So as the iodide comes out,
Peroxidase zaps it, turns it into oxidized iodine, and bam, it instantly binds to the tyrosine residues on the thyroglobulin.
the text is pretty stark about this enzyme. It says if you don't have peroxidase, the rate of hormone production falls to 0.
To 0, it stops completely. You can have all the iodine in the world, but if you can't oxidize it, you can't make a single molecule of hormone. This is actually a mechanism for some forms of congenital goiters. Children are born without this enzyme.
Wow. So Assuming we have the enzyme, we get to organification, which is just a fancy word for binding the iodine to the organic tyrosine molecule.
Right.
But this is where the math comes in, and I found this really helpful for understanding the difference between T3 and T4.
It's pretty simple addition, really. If the peroxidase attaches one iodine atom to a tyrosine, you get monoiodotyrosine, or MIT.
Okay.
If it attaches two iodine atoms, you get diiodotyrosine, or DIT.
But MIT and DIT aren't the hormones yet. They are just the Lego blocks.
Exactly. They're the components. The final step is called coupling. The enzymes inside the colloid have to physically fold that big protein molecule so that these iodinated tyrosines touch each other and fuse together.
And the recipes are what?
The recipes are one DIT plus another DIT, so two iodines plus two iodines equals 4. That's T4, or thyroxine.
Got it. And for T3?
One MIT plus one DIT, so 1 plus 2 equals 3. That's T3, or trimethylamine.
You've got it. That is the entire manufacturing process right there.
Yeah.
T4 is the major product. Something like 93% of what is made is T4. Only about 7% is T3.
Right. And there's a tiny bit of something called reverse T3 made, but the notes say it's biologically irrelevant for humans, so we can probably skip it.
Correct. It's a byproduct.
So now we have this big protein floating in the follicle, and it's studded with these T4 and T3 molecules. This brings us back to that incredible storage feature again. The thyroid is a hoarder.
It is a doomsday prepper.
It really is. This is one of the most evolutionarily significant features of the gland. The follicles hold enough stored hormone to supply the body for 2 to 3 months.
3 months? That's incredible.
Think about what that meant for early humans. If you were a hunter-gatherer and you moved away from the coast, or you went through a season where you couldn't find iodine-rich foods, you didn't die.
It didn't even slow down.
Not for months. Your body had a quarterly supply already banked in the colloid.
There is incredible stability. It explains why, if you stop taking your thyroid meds today, you don't feel it tomorrow.
Exactly. The crash is very, very slow. It takes weeks or even months for that reservoir to run dry.
Okay, so the warehouse is full, but the body needs the fuel. How do we get it out? We're in the logistics phase now. The hormone is trapped inside this giant thyroglobulin molecule in the middle of a lake. It can't just leak out into the blood.
No, the molecule is way too huge to pass through the cell membrane, so the cell has to do something really strange. It has to drink the colloid back in.
Penocytosis.
Penocytosis. The apical surface of the thyroid cell sends out these little arms. They're called pseudopods. They reach out into the follicle, wrap around a blob of the colloid soup, and then drag it back inside the cell.
It essentially takes a bite of its own inventory.
It takes a bite. So now you have a vesicle, a little bubble inside the cell that's filled with thyroglobulin. Then lysosomes, which are basically bags of digestive enzymes, fuse with that bubble.
And they just pour acid on it.
Acid and enzymes, yes. They pour them onto the thyroglobulin.
So they digest the protein backbone.
Yes. They chew up the thyroglobulin like it's food. This digestion liberates the T3 and T4 molecules. They're cut loose. And because T3 and T4 are lipid-soluble, once they're free, they can just diffuse right out the base of the cell and into the bloodstream.
But wait, the coupling process wasn't perfect, right? We had some leftover MIT and DIT that didn't get paired up. Did those get released too?
No, and this is another one of those amazing efficiency hacks. About 3/4 of the iodinated tyrosine and the thyroglobulin never actually becomes hormone. It's just scrap metal, so to speak.
Okay.
But the thyroid doesn't waste it. An enzyme called deiodinase strips the iodine off those leftovers inside the cell.
And recycles it.
It recycles it right back to the pump to start the process all over again. This is crucial because if you didn't have this recycling mechanism, you would lose so much iodine that you'd need to eat way, way more than 50 milligrams a year.
The source notes that some people are born without this deiodinase enzyme, and they end up suffering from severe iodine deficiency because they're literally peeing out their reserve.
Exactly.
No.
They are a leaky bucket. They can't hold onto their iodine.
Okay, let's track the hormone. T3 and T4 have left the building. They are in the bloodstream. But they don't just swim freely, do they?
No. If they swam freely, they would be filtered out by the kidneys or metabolized by the liver almost instantly. They'd be gone in minutes. They need a carrier.
Right.
Upon entering the blood, they bind immediately to plasma proteins. The main one is thyroxine-binding globulin, or TBG.
And that acts like a shield. Or a buffer.
It acts like a buffer and a storage tank. T4 binds extremely tightly to these proteins. T3 binds much more loosely. This binding prevents the hormone from acting all at once. It creates a time-release effect.
This is a really key concept for listeners to grasp because it explains the timing of everything. The source says, half of the T4 in the blood is released to the cells every 6 days. It is so slow.
Extremely slow.
Oh,
It's
no.
a slow drip. Whereas T3, because it binds less tightly, is released much faster. Half of it is released in about 1 day.
And this directly impacts what we call the latency effect. So if I were to inject a patient with a massive dose of T4 right now, I wouldn't see any change in their metabolic rate for days, would I?
No, the curve is fascinating. You inject T4 and literally nothing happens for 2 or 3 days. The metabolic rate doesn't budge.
Nothing.
Nothing. It takes 10 to 12 days to reach the peak effect, and that one single dose can keep the metabolism elevated for 6 weeks, maybe even 2 months.
It's not a stimulant like caffeine where you drink it and you feel the buzz in 20 minutes.
Not at all. And T3 is faster. It might hit its peak in maybe 2 to 3 days, but it's still not immediate. And to understand why there is this delay, we have to look at the mechanism of action. We have to look at what the hormone actually does to the cell.
This is the why behind the what. The hormone finally arrives at a target cell, muscle, liver, brain, whatever. It enters the cell. Then what?
Well, first, a crucial conversion happens. T4 is essentially a prohormone. It's the long-term storage format. When it gets inside the cell, an enzyme strips one iodine off the T4, turning it into T3.
So T3 is the active worker.
T3 is the active worker. About 90% of the hormone that actually binds to the receptor inside the cell is T3.
So T4 is the truck, and T3 is the package that gets delivered.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, where does T3 go? It goes straight to the nucleus. It goes to the command center.
It binds to DNA.
Indirectly, yes.
Yeah.
There are specific thyroid hormone receptors that are attached to the genetic strands in the DNA. The T3 binds to these receptors, but it's not a solo act. The receptor usually forms a complex heterodimer with another receptor called the retinoid X receptor, or RXR.
So they team up on the DNA strand.
They team up.
Yeah.
And when T3 locks in, it's like turning the key. It activates transcription. It turns the genetic library on.
And transcription means making mRNA, which means building new proteins.
Exactly. And this is the aha moment for the latency. Why does it take days to feel the effect? Because the thyroid hormone isn't just flipping a switch on existing machinery.
Right.
It is ordering a full-scale renovation. It is telling the cell to build hundreds of new intracellular proteins, new enzymes, new structural elements, new transport pumps.
You aren't just hitting the gas pedal. You are literally building a bigger engine.
You are building a bigger engine, and pouring the concrete for the foundation takes time. That is why the effect is so slow to start and so long to fade. You are physically altering the protein composition of the cell.
That makes perfect sense. So once the renovation is complete and these new proteins are built, what is the physiological result? What does the metabolic furnace actually look like?
Well, the headline is the basal metabolic rate, or BMR. As we said, it regulates the speed of the game, but specifically, it does this by targeting the mitochondria.
The power plants of the cell.
Right. Thyroid hormone triggers a massive increase in both the number and the size of mitochondria in almost every cell in your body. More total membrane surface area means more ATP production. You are generating more energy currency.
But there's a specific mechanism mentioned in the notes regarding the sodium-potassium pump again. It comes back.
Yes. This is one of the main ways the thyroid generates heat. We mentioned earlier that the sodium-potassium ATPase pump uses energy to keep sodium out of the cell, while thyroid hormone makes the cell membranes leakier to sodium.
It pokes holes in the ship.
Effectively, yes. It lets sodium seep back in more easily. This forces the pump to work overtime to push it back out. That friction, that metabolic effort of constantly pumping against a leak generates heat. A lot of heat.
So a hyperthyroid person feels hot because their cells are literally fighting a sodium leak 24/7.
Yes, that is thermogenesis. That is why hyperthyroid patients are so intolerant to heat. They are already running hot. And hypothyroid patients are freezing cold because their pumps are idle.
Let's talk about growth. Because the thyroid isn't just about heat and energy. It's about development. The tadpole example in the research really stuck with me.
It's a classic biology experiment. If you take a tadpole and you remove its thyroid gland, it will continue to grow. It will become a giant tadpole, but it will never turn into a frog.
It can't metamorphose.
It cannot trigger metamorphosis. It gets stuck in childhood.
And in humans, the parallel is skeletal growth. Thyroid hormone is essential for the growth plates in our bones to mature properly. Hypothyroid children grow very, very slowly.
But hyperthyroid children, those with too much hormone, they grow fast.
They shoot up like a beanstalk. But there is a penalty. The hormone causes the bones to mature too fast. The growth plates close, a process called epiphysis closure, way too early.
So they stop growing sooner.
Exactly. So even though they are tall at age 10, they stop growing, and as adults, they end up being shorter than average. It rushes the process and cuts the timeline short.
But the scariest impact of growth is on the brain.
This is critical. The source says it's absolutely essential for brain development in fetal and early postnatal life.
It is non-negotiable. Without thyroid hormone during that window, the neurons don't branch out properly. The myelin sheaths, the insulation on the nerve, don't form. The brain physically fails to wire itself correctly.
And if this isn't corrected,
If it isn't corrected within weeks of birth, the result is permanent, irreversible mental retardation.
we'll discuss the condition cretinism later, but it's heavy to realize that intelligence is dependent on this one chemical signal during that specific window.
It's a very, very narrow and critical window.
Okay, let's move to specific nutrients, carbs and fats. How does the thyroid handle them?
It accelerates everything. It's an all systems go signal. For carbohydrates, it increases the rapid uptake of glucose into cells, it increases glycolysis, which is burning sugar, and it even increases insulin secretion to handle the extra load.
And fats?
It strips the fat stores. It mobilizes lipids from your adipose tissue, dumping free fatty acids into the blood to be burned for energy. This is why hyperthyroid patients lose weight despite having a ravenous appetite.
They're burning the furniture to heat the house.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
What about cholesterol? This is a huge one for listeners because so many people struggle with high cholesterol.
This is a vital connection that's often missed. Hypothyroidism, low thyroid, leads to high cholesterol. Even mild subclinical hypothyroidism can do it.
Why? Is the body making more cholesterol?
No, it's failing to remove it. Thyroid hormone increases the number of LDL receptors on your liver cells. These receptors are the trash collectors. They pull LDL, the bad cholesterol, out of the blood.
So if you have low thyroid, you have fewer trash collectors on duty.
Exactly. The liver stops pulling cholesterol out efficiently, so it builds up in the blood. This is why undiagnosed hypothyroidism is a major silent cause of atherosclerosis and heart disease. The plumbing gets clogged because the cleaning crew is on strike.
That leads us perfectly into the systemic effects. Section 6 of our outline. We have to talk about the heart. The cardiovascular effects are massive.
They are, and this is often what brings a patient to the emergency room. Remember, metabolism is up, oxygen consumption is way up, the tissues are screaming for blood.
So the blood vessels dilate to let more through.
Yes. All those metabolic end products trigger vasodilation. The pipes widen to let more flow through. Specifically, the skin vessels dilate to dump all that excess heat we talked about.
So resistance in the circulatory system drops.
Resistance drops. But to maintain blood pressure, the heart has to pump much harder and much faster. Cardiac output rises, sometimes 60% or more above normal. That is a massive, massive load on the heart.
And the hormone stimulates the heart directly too, right? It's not just a reaction to the increased flow.
Correct. It has a direct effect, increasing the excitability of the heart muscle. The heart rate shoots up considerably.
So you have a racing heart pumping a massive volume of blood. In the short term, the heart actually gets stronger to compensate. But what happens in the long term?
Decompensation. If a person has severe thyrotoxicosis for a long time, the heart muscle starts to die. It literally catabolizes its own protein because the metabolic demand is too high. The heart fails. This is often how people die from a thyroid storm. High output heart failure.
Now, that is terrifying. It literally works itself to death. What about the other systems? The gut, for instance.
It drives motility. Hyperthyroidism causes diarrhea because the gut is moving too fast for water to be properly absorbed. Hypothyroidism causes severe constipation because the gut is sluggish and almost paralyzed.
And the central nervous system. We touched on the brain development, but what about the adult brain?
Oh, it's the difference between being wired and being in a fog. Hyperthyroid patients are nervous, anxious, sometimes paranoid. They have psychoneurotic tendencies. They feel like they drank 20 espressos.
And hypo.
Hypo patients are sluggish. They complain of mental fog. Their processing speed slows down to a crawl.
I found the muscle tremor interesting. It's a very specific clinical sign.
Yes, it's a fine tremor. It's not like the coarse shaking of Parkinson's disease. This is a very high-frequency vibration, maybe 10 to 15 times per second.
The text suggests a test for it by having the patient hold their hands out with a sheet of paper on them.
Right. You watch the paper, it vibrates. This happens because the neuronal synapses in the spinal cord that control muscle tone are hypersensitive. The gain is turned up way too high on the muscle control.
And sleep. What happens there?
The hyperthyroid patient is the definition of tired but wired. They are physically exhausted because their body is running a marathon 24/7, but they cannot sleep because the brain is so excitable.
And the opposite for hypo, I assume.
Conversely, the hypothyroid patient can experience extreme somnolence. They can sleep 12, 14 hours a day and still wake up feeling completely exhausted.
One last systemic effect that people might not associate with the thyroid, sexual function.
It affects the gonads significantly. In women, the thyroid dictates the menstrual cycle. Lack of hormone often causes menorrhagia, which is excessive, heavy bleeding, and irregular cycles.
And what about too much hormone?
That can cause oligomenorrhea, very light periods, or even amenorrhea, where the periods stop altogether. In men, it's just as impactful. Lack of hormone kills the libido. Excess hormone can cause impotence. So it really does touch every single aspect of being human.
It is the metronome for everything. So how does the body control this monster? We can't just have it running wild all the time. We need to talk about regulation, the feedback loop.
It's a classic negative feedback loop, but it has a few layers to it. The immediate boss of the thyroid is the anterior pituitary gland. It secretes TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone.
TSH, we see this on our lab results all the time.
Yeah.
What's TSH actually do to the thyroid gland?
It screams more at the gland. It binds to the thyroid cell and triggers a whole cascade. It increases the breakdown of thyroglobulin to release hormone. It speeds up the iodide pump. It even increases the size and number of thyroid cells.
So if TSH is high for a long time, the gland physically grows bigger.
Yes, that is how you get a goiter. The gland creates more factory space to try and meet the demand.
But the pituitary isn't the ultimate boss. Who tells the pituitary what to do?
That would be the hypothalamus. It's the part of the brain that bridges the nervous system and the endocrine system. It secretes TRH, thyrotropin-releasing hormone.
And the hypothalamus acts like a thermostat for the body.
Exactly. A great example is cold. If you are exposed to freezing temperatures for a long time, the hypothalamus senses this. It cranks up TRH, which cranks up TSH, which cranks up thyroid hormone.
Which turns up the metabolic furnace to generate more body heat.
Precisely. The source mentions that people moving to Arctic regions can see their BMR increase by 15 to 20% over time.
It's an adaptive mechanism, but there's also an inhibitory signal, emotion.
Right. Stress and anxiety stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system can actually drop TSH levels. The brain decides we are stressed out, let's conserve energy for now, and turns the dial down.
And the feedback loop itself, the shutdown switch.
It's the hormone itself. High levels of T3 and T4 circulating in the blood travel back to the pituitary and say, okay, we have enough. The pituitary responds by shutting off TSH secretion almost instantly. It's a very tight, very rapid control system designed to keep levels stable.
So we have the map, we know how the factory works, how the trucks deliver the goods, and how the boss manages the inventory. Now let's look at the car crashes. Section 8, pharmacology and pathology. How do we break the factory?
Well, sometimes we want to break it intentionally, like when a patient has hyperthyroidism, we use antithyroid substances for that.
Like thiocyanate.
Thiocyanate is interesting because it's a competitive inhibitor. It mimics iodine. It goes to the iodide pump and basically jams it. It's like putting the wrong key in the lock.
So the pump can't trap real iodine.
Right. And if you block the pump, the thyroid stops making hormone. T3 and T4 levels drop. But, and here's the twist, the pituitary sees that drop and screams more TSH.
So the gland gets stimulated to grow because of all the TSH, but it can't make anything because the pump is jammed.
Exactly. You get a goiter, a massive gland, but no hormone production.
What about propylthiouracil? That's a mouthful. Let's call it PTU.
PTU works a little later in the assembly line. It blocks the peroxidase enzyme, so it stops the coupling step. No DIT plus DIT. So again, you get no hormone, TSH rises, and a goiter forms.
And then there is the paradox of high iodides. You said we need iodine, but the notes say that high concentrations of iodine can actually shut the gland down.
It's a strange physiological quirk. If you flood the blood with massive concentrations of iodides, we're talking 100 times the normal requirement, it paralyzes the thyroid. It seems to stop the endocytosis mechanism. The cell stops drinking the colloid.
So the hormone stays trapped in the factory.
Yes. And surgeons actually use this. If they have to operate on a hyperactive thyroid, which is very bloody, they give the patient massive doses of iodine for 2 weeks before the surgery.
Why?
It shuts down the secretion, and crucially, it decreases the blood flow and shrinks the gland, which makes the operation much safer.
Let's talk about the diseases themselves. Hyperthyroidism. The classic presentation is Graves' disease.
Graves is fascinating because it's an autoimmune disease, but it's a very unique one. Usually autoimmune means your body attacks and destroys an organ. In Graves's, your body accidentally makes an antibody that mimics TSH,
The TSI.
thyroid-stimulating immunoglobulin. This antibody binds to the TSH receptor on the thyroid cell and turns it on. But unlike TSH, which does its job and leaves after about an hour, TSI stays there. It lasts for 12 hours.
It's a permanent on switch that's stuck.
It is. So the gland is running at 100% capacity, 247, driven by this rogue antibody. If you check the blood of a Graves patient, their actual TSH level is 0.
Because the pituitary has shut down TSH production due to the negative feedback loop from all the T4.
Exactly. The pituitary is screaming, stop, but the antibody is whispering, go, and the thyroid is listening to the antibody.
And this leads to that very specific and, frankly, frightening symptom, exophthalmos, the bulging eyes.
Yes. This occurs in about a third of hyperthyroid patients, and it's not just that they are staring wide-eyed. The eyeballs literally protrude from their sockets.
What pushes them out?
It seems to be the same autoimmune reaction. It targets the tissues behind the eye. The retroorbital tissues swell with edema and immune cells. It gets crowded in the eye socket, and the path of least resistance is forward.
That sounds incredibly dangerous for the eye itself.
It is. The optic nerve can get stretched and damaged, which can lead to blindness, and often the eyelids can't close completely over the bulging eye, so the cornea dries out and ulcerates. It's a true medical emergency.
So how do you treat Graves? You can't just ask the antibodies to stop.
No. You usually have to destroy the target of the antibodies, which is the thyroid. You can remove it surgically, or you can use a Trojan horse method with radioactive iodine.
How does that work?
Since the thyroid is the only organ in the body that actively traps iodine, if you give a patient a drink of radioactive iodine, it goes straight to the thyroid and nowhere else.
Okay.
Concentrates there, and it destroys the secretory cells from the inside out with radiation. It's a very targeted strike.
So you kill the gland, and then you put the patient on synthetic T4 pills for the rest of their life.
Exactly. You replace the broken factory with a reliable daily dose.
Now the flip side, hypothyroidism. The engine is frozen.
The most common cause today, at least in the developed world, is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. This is the more normal kind of autoimmune response. The antibodies attack and destroy the gland tissue. You get inflammation, fibrosis, and eventually the gland just shrivels up and dies.
But historically, the big cause was endemic goiter.
This is the tragedy of geography. It's caused simply by a lack of iodine in the soil and therefore the diet.
The source mentions the Swiss Alps and the Great Lakes region of the U.S. as hotspots.
Yes. Because glaciers stripped the iodine from the soil eons ago. So before modern food transport, the people living there ate food grown in iodine-poor soil. They had no iodine.
So the pituitary sensed low hormone and pumped out massive amounts of TSH.
And the gland grew huge. We are talking about goiters the size of grapefruits or even melons hanging from people's necks. The gland is desperately expanding, trying to catch any stray iodine molecule it can, but there are none to catch.
It's a giant factory with no raw materials.
Precisely.
What does a patient with severe hypothyroidism look like? The term myxedema comes up.
Myxedema describes the physical look. It means mucus swelling. Patients develop this characteristic bagginess under the eyes and a swelling of the face. But if you touch it, it's not like normal water retention where you leave a fingerprint. It's non-pitting.
What is inside the swelling if it's not water?
It's a gel-like substance. Hyaluronic acid and chondroitin sulfate build up in the interstitial spaces between cells. It essentially creates a thick, viscous bog in the tissues.
And finally, we have to talk about the most heartbreaking condition in this entire chapter. Cretinism.
Cretinism is extreme hypothyroidism occurring during fetal life, infancy, or early childhood. It can be congenital, a baby is born without a gland, or it can be endemic because the mother didn't have enough iodine during pregnancy.
We talked about the brain development window earlier. This is the consequence of missing that window.
Yes. The tragedy of it is the permanence. Skeletal growth stops, so the child is stocky and short. But more importantly, the brain stops developing.
And there is a ticking clock.
A very, very fast one. If the baby is diagnosed and treated with thyroxine within a few weeks of birth, development can be completely normal. We catch this now with routine heel prick tests in hospitals.
But if you wait,
If the treatment is delayed by even a few months, the mental retardation is permanent.
the brain structure is set.
The concrete has dried. You can restart the skeletal growth later in life, but you cannot restart the mind.
The description of the physical signs is quite graphic. The tongue grows large and can obstruct breathing.
Yes, the tongue becomes thickened and enlarged, which can lead to guttural breathing and choking. It's the distinct, devastating clinical picture.
It really emphasizes how fragile our development is. We're these incredibly complex biological machines, but if you take away this one tiny trace element at the right time, the whole system just fails to launch.
It does. It hangs by a thread of iodine.
So we have covered the factory, the fuel, the furnace, and the failures. What is the big takeaway for you here when you step back from all the biochemistry?
For me, it's the concept of the metronome. The thyroid doesn't just do one thing. It sets the tempo for the entire symphony of the body. If the tempo is too fast, the musicians, the heart, the mind, the gut can't keep up and they eventually collapse. If it's too slow, the music just dies out.
It's the Goldilocks gland. It has to be just right.
And the fact that it relies so heavily on a single element, iodine, that we have to get from our environment is profound. It connects our internal physiology directly to the geology of the earth we live on.
It really is. I also keep coming back to that storage mechanism, that 2 to 3 months of backup supply in the colloid.
It's a brilliant survival mechanism. We are designed to survive scarcity. But in the modern world, our problems are rarely a scarcity of iodine, at least in developed nations. Our problems now are autoimmune, the body attacking itself. It's a shift from external threats to internal confusion.
That is a fascinating way to put it. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the thyroid. It's been a pleasure unpacking all of this with you.
Always a pleasure.
I have a final thought for our listener. We've talked about pumps and proteins and enzymes for the last hour. But next time you are in your kitchen and you pick up that little round shaker of iodized salt, take a second.
It's not just seasoning.
It isn't. You aren't just making your fries taste better. You are fueling the microscopic pumps that are literally keeping your brain thinking and your heart beating right this second. It's a miracle in a salt shaker.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.